All right, so a couple more people coming in. I got Miss oops. Oh, here we go. Ooh, too much going on. I got Miss Pahovich. She's sending the new link to the people that were over on the other side. If you're just joining me from the original link, I do apologize. I'm not quite sure what happened there, but we're getting everything squared away so we can get this review going. I'm excited to get going on this. I've spent the last hour teaching another class. Now I'm coming into this one. I know I got a lot of my students coming in. Miss Pahovich is going to join us here in the chat, and she'll answer your questions for you as we go. And like I said, I just hope we get everybody in because I feel bad about that chat going down. So have questions ready for us. You're going to put the questions in the chat. I'm going to break out the chat here so it's a little bit easier for me to see. Pop out chat. All right, Fletcher, I appreciate the subscribing. Maybe I can start making some money here. I doubt it, but we can try. All right, so I got that going. And let's see. All right, everyone can see me, correct? Can everyone see me okay? Because my screen's all acting up funny. You guys got me on screen? Just let me know. Okay, good. All right. YouTube is challenging me tonight. I do apologize. So, close this out. Close that. Awesome. Thank you, guys. All right, so we're going to go ahead and get started. It looks like we have about maybe 17, 12, some odd people here. I don't know if Miss Pahovich have gotten over here yet or not. Let me check my email here. Good deal. They got it updated in the system, so we're good to go. All right, so tonight we are talking about period 3. Now, I know a lot of my O'Connor kids are here. We might even have some kids. I was talking to a teacher over at Clark, and they're having their APUSH test tomorrow, period 3 as well. So, man, it's an APUSH world tonight, and we're going to get into period 3, which essentially covers the year 1754 to 1800. So let me go ahead. I'm going to get my PowerPoint up and running. We'll see if that works. Who knows? Big ideas, there they are. And we got the big ideas rolling. So let's get started. Now, when we look at this time period, what we're essentially going to is we're going from colonies and we're going into as becoming an independent nation. And we're going to start during this time to establish our national identity. And so this is where we're at, this is where we're going, and this is what we're going to talk about tonight. So I'm going to get this set there a little bit better. Okay, so here we go. We're going to start with big idea number 1. Now we have 10 big ideas that we want to cover. Some of them really short, some of them have lots of information. So take notes the best you can. Ask questions. Ms. Pahovich is here. She's going to help us out. Help each other out in the chat. Don't be yahoos. This is going to be serious. We're going to have some fun, but don't get all screwy in the chat because we're here to get some work done and get some learning on and get ready for this test tomorrow because it's all about, rocking the AP exam. So are you ready? So big idea number 1. The French and Indian War led to increased land for the American colonies and a greater burden of taxation. So we always say that the French-Indian War is really what's going to lead to American independence. But what we need to know is the French and Indian War was part of a bigger war. It was part of the 7 Years' War that's being fought over in Europe. And as I talked about in my class, it's even part of a bigger war. It's part of the Second 100 Years' War. And it spilled over here into the colonies because we weren't immune to what was going on into the world at that time. And so the French-Indian War basically got started when England is going to fear that the French are encroaching on our western borders. So what they're essentially going to do is they're going to come over here, and initially what they do is they gather together a Congress of colonial representatives with the idea that they can help start defending the western border of the English colonies. Now, as we talked about in class, that was 1754. And during that time, Benjamin Franklin is going to come up with this idea for the Albany Plan of Union. And the Albany Plan of Union was this idea to bring together the 13 colonies under this idea of a centralized government. and together they would build a common militia that would help defend the colonies. But the big problem with the Albany Plan of Union is none of the colonies wanted to give up any of their tax dollars because they were collecting taxes locally in their colonies and they weren't willing to share their wealth. So the Albany Plan of Union failed. But what's important about the Albany Plan is that it set the seeds for unification of the colonies that's going to happen 12 years later. So it kind of plants the seed, and even though it doesn't sprout at this point, it's going to be fertilized and watered over the next few years, and that idea is going to start to grow, and it's going to get more popular. So the English are worried about the French encroaching on English land. The French at the same time are worried about the English encroaching on their lands. And that's what's going to lead to the French and Indian War. And it's essentially going to be fought over the Ohio River Valley region, because that region was very rich in resources, natural resources, lumber, great fertile soil, lots of animals, so fur trapping and stuff was huge. And so the fighting is going to take place over there. In the end, England is going to win this war. And while the war itself is important, it's the effects of the war that is the most important. Hang on just a second. Just a second. Sorry, guys. This one I had to answer. All right. So the effects of the French and Indian War was the sense that the colonists, what they want is they're going to want to push west after the end of the war, because the Treaty of Paris of 1763 essentially gave all the North American lands to England. France was gone. The Louisiana Territory is going to go to Spain, and now the colonists, they want their spoils of war because they fought alongside the English when they fought against the French and the Native Americans. And so they are going to start pushing west. When they start pushing west, the Native Americans are going to be like, what's going on? This is our land. And the English are saying to them, no, the colonists are saying, no, we won the war, so we won the land. And the Native Americans, I saw someone explain this today. They said, well, what land did you win? And they're like, this land right here. We won it from the French. And the natives are like, well, who did the French get it from? And the English are like, well, the natives were just completely left out of all discussions. And so the one I want you to know is Chief Pontiac of the Ottawa tribe. And all right, I'm going to stop this right now. Guys, there's a lot of garbage going on in the chat, and I don't want to see that tonight, okay? Because we're trying to get some stuff going. So, Samba, get off or just be quiet. I'm just going to say that right now. Okay, so anyway, the Chief Pontiac of the Ottawa tribe is going to be the guy who's going to create this confederation. And this confederation of Native American tribes are going to start pushing back against the colonial settlers coming out west. The English aren't going to want to have to deal with this. They don't want to deal with these rebellions. So Pontiac's rebellion is going to lead the English to tell the colonists, you need to get back. Take a step back, go back to the eastern side of the Appalachian Mountains. And what England is going to do is they are going to pass the Royal Proclamation of 1763. And 1763, that proclamation line basically divides the English colonies from the western frontier that was won during the French-Indian War. And the colonists are told, you cannot cross that line because the English government can't defend you over there. And the English government tells the Native Americans, this land is now reserved for you. You are safe. Don't worry about the colonists coming over. Now, was the proclamation line effective? No, there's going to be people that get across the line. And I mean, Daniel Boone is a perfect example. He's a perfect example of someone, he'd led people across the line, I think, into that Ohio River Valley. So you can't defend every single square inch of that line. So people will get across, but they know crossing that they're not going to get the protection of the English army. So that's going to be a problem. The other big effect of the French and Indian War is going to be debt. Money. This war cost a lot of money to the English government, and they're going to look to the colonists to pull that money out. And they're going to start pulling back on the lifestyle that the colonists had gotten so used to. And that was this lifestyle of salutary neglect. That idea that they could live however they wanted without having to worry about the English enforcing the laws that had been put in place. So let me just get to big idea number 2. Oops, sorry, too far. Big idea number 2, the British colonial policy, specifically taxation without colonial representation in Parliament, led to the Revolutionary War. So first big thing England did was the Proclamation Line of 1763. Then what you're going to see happening is they're going to start looking at the colonies and say, you know what? We have been making money from the colonies, but we need to make more because we have all this debt. And so you're going to start seeing series of taxes starting to be implemented in the colonies. The English are also going to start reinforcing the Navigation Acts. The Navigation Acts have been on the books since the 1650s, but they haven't been enforced. Now they're going to start enforcing those laws. Smuggling is not going to be, they're not just going to look sideways at it and say, oh, those crazy smugglers. Now they're going to be like, get after those crazy smugglers. In fact, if you remember, during the French-Indian War in 1763, England passed the Writs of Assistance. And that essentially allowed the English government to search any vessel or any building they thought necessary to stop smuggling. And we talked about the James Otis case in that regard. So they are really starting to crack down. So one of the first, the first things they do is they pass a Quartering Act. The Quartering Act, they got to start enforcing these rules. They got to start enforcing the proclamation line. So they're going to send troops into the colonies. Now that's got a world of problems all on its own, because what's happening is what we're used to at this time in history is countries didn't maintain standing armies if they were at peace. And the colonies are thinking, we're at peace, the war's over, yet we still have all these soldiers here. What's going on with this? And on top of that, with the Quartering Act, they had to house the soldiers, they had to feed the soldiers, they had to do the soldiers' laundry. I think the way I described it in my class was, it was adopt a soldier in the colonies, and it's not like you got to pick who you adopted. They became your responsibility. So this is going to upset the colonies. Then the Sugar Act is going to be passed. Now, the Sugar Act was an extension of the Molasses Act that had been passed back in the 1730s, but it also incorporated a couple of taxes within it on some fine goods like coffee and wine and other luxury goods. So they're going to start taxing the colonists. The one that really gets them going is going to be the Stamp Act. The Stamp Act was passed in 1765, and when that's passed, that was a tax on all paper products, legal documents, playing cards, stuff like that. This is when you're going to start seeing the colonists really start to push back. They're going to form the Stamp Act Congress, and the Stamp Act Congress is going to address, Great Britain, trying to get them to repeal that law. At the same time, you're going to see a group called the Sons of Liberty formed during this time. And the Sons of Liberty are going to start leading protests, some of them violent with the tar and feathering. And they're going to, the Sons of Liberty are going to be very proactive in their protests and stuff like that. It's also the very first time we hear the phrase, no taxation without representation. And this is where the colonies are going to start arguing, you can't tax us because we do not have a voice in government. And they're going to go all the way back to the Magna Carta, and they're going to say, you can't have taxation without the consent of those being taxed. And so they're like, we don't have any representatives in Parliament, so how do you have our consent? And the argument that's going to be made coming out of England is you absolutely have representation. It's called virtual representation. And the idea of virtual representation is that when an Englishman takes the oath of office to serve in Parliament, he is taking the oath to serve all Englishmen, not based on geography, but based on the fact that they are part of the English Empire. So England's going to push back against this no taxation without representation with the idea of you absolutely are represented. However, they will end up repealing the Stamp Act due to all the protests and stuff like that. But then they're going to follow that up with the Declaratory Act. And the Declaratory Act essentially says, yeah, we're going to go ahead and repeal this law, but we have the right to pass any law that we want because you're a colony and we are the English Empire and we rule over you. The next big act that you should be familiar with is the Townsend Act. This is going to be a tax on things like paper and lead and paint and glass and tea. And this is going to be passed. And then what you're going to see is really highly organized protest in the colonies. Sons of Liberty come back, but they're also going to be another group that you should be familiar with called the Daughters of Liberty. The Daughters of Liberty are going to come in, and what they're going to do is they're going to organize boycotts. They're going to start creating homespun fabric so you don't have to buy the British goods and stuff like that. And things, start to, again, they're pushing back. And I'm telling you, these boycotts, more than anything, affect this taxation because this affects the merchants back in Britain. And the merchants have the ear of Parliament. And the more they complain because they're not making the money they once were over here, now they look to Parliament and says, hey, dude, get this tax off because they're not buying our stuff. And it's costing us money here. So they repealed the Townsend Acts with the exception of the tea tax. And things seem to be a little quiet anymore, but the soldiers are still in here, in the colonies at the same time. And the colonists are not happy with the soldiers. And the soldiers are a constant reminder that England is trying to enforce its authority over the colonies. And they don't like that. This is what leads to the Boston Massacre in 1770. I always talk about, and I was just talking today, the 1760s was more of the age of protest. When we get into the 1770s, starting with the Boston Massacre in 1770, we enter into the age of bloodshed because blood is going to be spilled for the very first time. When the Boston Massacre occurs, you're going to see, we really don't know who fired the shot, but it started with, a bunch of young men probably, feeling a little high, a little good, because they've been in the taverns and stuff, started heckling the soldiers, started throwing snowballs, and then started throwing rocks, and it just escalated from there. Don't know who fired the first shot, but what we do know is 4 people are going to get killed, 11 people are going to get injured, and the first drops of blood have been spilled in this road towards independence. Then we kind of go through a relatively calm period for several years where not a lot happens. But then we get to 1773. 1773, Parliament is going to pass the Tea Act. And the Tea Act was essentially a monopoly for the East India Trading Company. That's the only tea that the American colonies could purchase. And what it was tea that was owned by this company coming out of India. A lot of members of Parliament had stock in that company, so that's why they passed the law. And as I talked about in class, it was a good quality tea. And it was actually sold a little bit cheaper than the tea that they had in America. But what we wanted the choice. We wanted to buy crappy expensive tea. We wanted to have that ability. And so this is going to lead to the Boston Massacre, where men are going to dress up like Mohawk Indians. They're going to go and they're going to dump all this tea into Boston Harbor. And that is going to tick off Parliament because now you're hitting them in their wallets. And when that happens, they're going to pass the coercive acts that you probably know as the Intolerable Acts. And the big parts of that is they're going to shut down Boston Harbor with the Boston Port Act. And then they're going to add another quartering act. More soldiers are going to come in. They're going to pass other parts to, the idea that, I just lost my train of thought. The Massachusetts Governing Act. You can't have your local legislatures anymore. You can't have your town hall meetings anymore. And then the Quebec Act. The Quebec Act is kind of tied to the Intolerable Acts, and that's where we see all these French national citizens who are now part of the British Empire getting all these rights that were being taken away from the colonists at the same time. So the Intolerable Act is going to lead to the meeting of the First Continental Congress. And the First Continental Congress came together. They put together their Declaration of Rights and Grievances. But what they said is, we need to get organized. We need to organize ourselves just in case there's violence. And they're going to send everybody off back to their colonies saying, go ahead, get your militias ready, arm them up, just in case we have to go to war, just in case we need to actually physically start protecting our liberty. And so that's how the First Continental Congress ended. That's going to take us to big idea number 3. Here we go. Big idea number 3. The Enlightenment ideals exhibited a major influence on the American independence movement, especially exhibited in Thomas Paine's Common Sense and the Declaration of Independence. All right, let's get into this. So we've already had, our colonists have already gone off. We've already had, the Declaration of Rights and Grievances sent off to the king and everything. What we haven't talked about is the influences that are coming into the colonies, that have been coming into the colonies since the early 1700s. And those are the Enlightenment influences, specifically the idea of natural rights, that we're all born with these natural rights that can't be taken away, of life, liberty, and property. Also, this idea of a social contract that the people share with the government, that the people give up a little bit of their freedom in order to be protected by the government. But if the government doesn't do its job, the people have the right to change their government. And that was a social contract. Another big idea that came from the Enlightenment is this Republican, small r, Republican form of government, in which you have a separation of powers and checks and balances so that governments can't grow and grow into this tyrannical style of leadership and governing and stuff like that. So these are the influences coming in at this time. And this is what's going to be influencing the guys when they come together for the Second Continental Congress. The Second Continental Congress is going to be a result of the first battle of the American Revolution. 1775, Lexington and Concord happened just west of Boston when English troops were marching towards Lexington and Concord, looking for the militia armory that they had where they were storing weapons. They were also looking for Paul Revere and Samuel Adams and John Hancock. And we're going to have a fight between the militias of Boston and Massachusetts versus the English army. The very first battle. After that, you're also going to see the Battle of Bunker Hill. And that's an important battle too, just because of, even though England won the Battle of Bunker Hill, the colonists inflicted mass casualties on the English army. So the Second Continental Congress is going to come together, and they're going to make a last-ditch effort for peace. And they're going to send the Olive Branch petition to the King of England. While they're waiting, they're going to start looking at the possibility of independence. Richard Henry Lee is going to introduce the Independence Resolution. And in that, they're going to determine that they are actually going to go ahead and go for independence, and they're also going to draft the Declaration of Independence. Meanwhile, the king has heard about what happened at Bunker Hill. He heard about how he had mass casualties inflicted on his English soldiers. Then he gets this little olive branch petition. He's like, peace? Are you out of your mind? You just basically decimated my army. No peace. And he's going to pass the proclamation for rebellion. And he's going to declare that the colonies are actually in rebellion. So all of this is kind of happening within a several months period. And what we're going to see happening is we're going to see Thomas Paine, who wants to reach out to a lot of the American people, because even though you have this group of people who are pushing for independence, you still have a lot of people who really don't care, and you have a lot of people who are still very loyal to the crown. And they're called loyalists, and they still believed in staying part of the English Empire. And I mean, anywhere from 20 to 30% of the people in the colonies were still loyalists. So in January of 1776, Thomas Paine is going to draft Common Sense. And the purpose of Common Sense would be to convince people to get behind this idea of independence. And the idea is that he's going to bring in the ideas of natural rights. He's going to bring in all these Enlightenment ideas, and he's going to put it in a vernacular that it's easy for the common people to understand. And over 100,000 copies of this are going to be printed. And so you're going to see the not the acceptance, but the support of independence starting to grow in our country. That's going to get us to the Declaration of Independence. And when you read the Declaration of Independence, you are reading Enlightenment, because that's what Thomas Jefferson and the other members of his committee put in there. They brought in the Enlightenment ideas, and then it goes, and then it goes right into the grievances, where they break down every single thing that they are not happy with the king. And that declaration is going to be it's going to be written, it's going to be accepted on January 2nd. It's going to be sent to the states, July 2nd, 1776, and it'll be sent to the states on July 4th, 1776. And at this point, we have now entered into war with Britain. And like I said, the king has already issued his proclamation of rebellion. So basically, as and I see the questions you guys are asking, and you're hitting on the main Enlightenment ideas. Arnold, I'll just throw this out there. I mean, natural rights, the social contract, Republican values. Those are the main Enlightenment ideas that you should probably be familiar with. Scientific thought. That's another example. So there you go. That's going to take us to big idea number 4. We're at war. Woo! Despite Britain's military and financial advantages, the American patriots won the Revolutionary War and gained independence. I hope I didn't give away the end too soon. Anyway, so we're at war. And like I said, the very first battle was back in 1775, and that's going to be the Battle of Lexington and Concord. We already talked about the Battle of Bunker's Hill, and I saw Ms. Pahovich corrected me. It's also officially Breed's Hill. I just like Bunker better. It sounds cool. But anyway, we're going to see the major battle you absolutely have to know. You have to know this is the Battle of Saratoga, 1777. We weren't supposed to win this, but somehow we won this major battle. And when we won, the big effect of the Battle of Saratoga is France is going to join our cause. They're going to ally themselves with the Americans, and they're going to send troops, and they're going to send money, and they're going to send supplies, and they're going to send that one guy that everyone loves from Hamilton, the Marquis de Lafayette. Everyone loves Lafayette, and they're going to come over and they're going to help us. What's often overlooked is France is going to bring their buddy Spain. And Spain's going to give us maybe not so much troops or anything, but they're going to give us money, and they're going to give us supplies, and we're going to have the French Navy, and now, things are looking better. And so that's going to, take us all the way to 1781. Yes, I'm at the end of the war already, because that's what you need to know. You need to know the Battle of Yorktown in 1781. And what we see coming out of that, like I said, we have the Continental Army. I jumped over this, led by George Washington. George Washington had a way of bringing the military together, both the Continental Army as well as the militias that were coming from each of the states. Hang on, let me answer this text real quick, because I got your text message, Arnold, and there is absolutely something I can do. Text me who it is. Text me who it is, and I'll knock them out. Okay, so I'm going to wait for that text to come in, and then we'll get on to our next big idea. But now's a great time. I'm going to pause here at the end of the war, and I'm going to see if any questions come out that I can help answer real quick. And like I said, as soon as I get this name, I will take care of it. It's the power of the clicker. So let me get out of here. Okay, let's see. Participants. Oh my goodness. Okay. Sorry, guys. I have a Yahoo in here that I need to get out, so give me just a minute so I can get them out real quick. And we're going to move on to big idea number 5 here while I'm waiting. As we're in the war, we have to form a government. And we actually formed... Okay, so... All right, guys. I'm just going to pause here for a second. So we have a situation right now where I have one of my students who is, his name is being used in the chat, and it's his name and his likeness, and it's not him. And so I'm just going to go ahead and give a warning right now that if this crap doesn't end, I'm going to shut down the chat. Because this is supposed to be a learning opportunity. And if you guys, if whoever's in here doing this, if you want to do this and you want to play this game, you're basically going to ruin it for everybody. So knock it off. Focus on the tasks that we're doing right now. And if you can't play nice, then get out. And this is the only warning, because I will shut down that chat. In fact, I'll just shut down the whole thing, because this is supposed to be a help for everybody. And if you can't handle it, and if you can't be mature enough to handle it, then you don't belong here. And if you're in an APUSH class, shame on you. So, all right. So we're going to go ahead and keep going here. Big idea number 5. And the big idea number 5 is the Articles of Confederation was the first constitution of the United States of America, and it failed largely because the federal government was too weak. We had to create a government right away. So we're going to create the Articles of Confederation. And basically, here's the thing. All we did to create our government, we had a lot of state governments at this point. So we had state constitutions, and those state constitutions were created to give power to the states, to give decision-making power to the states and stuff like that. And so what's going to happen is Congress, in creating the Articles of Confederation, are going to use the exact same model. And so the federal government, though, is only going to be set up with a legislative branch. And that legislative branch is going to be very restrictive. They're not going to have very much power at all. They don't have the power to raise an army. I mean, they can raise an army, but they can't pay an army because they do not have the power to tax. And so that's going to pretty much lead them to be ineffective completely. And so it's going to get us through the war, though. The Articles of Confederation, there were some positives that came out of it, and I want to touch on those real quickly. The first one is, obviously, it got us through the war. And getting us through the war was very important because, without that government, that wouldn't have happened. Another major positive of the Articles of Confederation is going to be the Northwest Ordinance of 1787. The Northwest Ordinance is essentially going to set the groundwork for how we will bring new states into our union. And it's going to be centered up around the Great Lakes region, so that's why it's called the Northwest Ordinance. And we're going to get 5 new states out of that ordinance. And the big thing that you need to know about the Northwest Ordinance is it bans slavery in those territories. So 2 big positive things that came out of the Articles of Confederation are going to be, we got through the war, and the Northwest Ordinance. Of course, we're going to have a little bit of problem because we are still, coming out of the war, signing the Treaty of Paris of 1783. We're now our own nation, and our nation has a lot of debt. We have the same problem that England had coming out of the French Indian War. And so what's going to happen is a lot of these soldiers are going to come home and they're going to be facing loans and stuff that they can't pay back, and they don't have the money to pay it because Congress didn't have the money to pay them. In fact, all what Congress gave them was essentially bonds or promissory notes saying, we'll pay you when we can pay you. And so one of those soldiers who comes home is Daniel Shays. And Daniel Shays, a farmer in Western Massachusetts, is trying to prevent the foreclosures on the farms in Western Massachusetts. So he's going to organize some 2,000, farmers and stuff, and they're going to march on the courts with the intent of trying to put down or shut down the courts so then they can't foreclose. Now, there is going to be a private militia that's going to come in and put down that revolt or Shays Rebellion before it gets too out of hand. But here's the thing. What Shays' Rebellion showed us was that the Articles of Confederation were entirely too weak. There wasn't enough power in them to get anything done on the national level. And because of that, there's going to be a meeting in Annapolis, and, they're going to talk about, maybe we should redo this. No one came. Only like 5 states came. And then they said, all right, let's get back together. We're going to get together in 1787 in Philadelphia, and we're going to try to amend or fix the Articles of Confederation, which leads us to big idea number 6. When we realize, you know what? This is so broke, there's no way we can fix it. So the Articles of Confederation are going to be tossed to the side, and we're going to start from scratch. So big idea number 6, the Constitutional Convention was called to draft a new constitution in order to rectify the weaknesses of the Articles of Confederation. Like I said, they wanted to revise the Articles, but they couldn't. It was just too far gone. So we need a new government. We need a new constitution. Immediately, we're going to have conflict. You're going to have a lot of debates. You're going to have a lot of different opinions. You're going to have a lot of wants and needs in this new constitution. You're going to see a group of people rise up called the Federalists. The Federalists are going to support the idea of a strong central government. And their opponents are going to be the anti-federalists who worried about a strong central government. They worried about the rise of tyranny and stuff like that. And these are the two sides debating the Constitution. The first question, the first area of debate is going to be about representation. How much representation should every state have? Under the Articles, every state just had 1 vote. They want to change that now in the Constitution. And basically, that cracks me up. I'm sorry, guys. YouTube puts a little filter on some of the stuff you guys write, and it asks me, do you want to show it or do you want to hide something? And it's nothing wrong at all. It just cracks me up that it asks that one particular question. Anyway, so what you have is you introduce this idea called the Virginia Plan. And the Virginia Plan was about representation based on population. Now, it was introduced by James Madison in Virginia, one of the biggest states in the Union. So they would absolutely benefit from representation based on population because they'd get a whole bunch of representatives. The small states are over here thinking, wait a minute, we're not going to be heard. We're not going to have the same voice in government. We're not going to have the same level of power in government because the big states are going to have all the representatives. So they're just going to put us down. They came up with their own plan called the New Jersey Plan. And the New Jersey Plan was all about equal representation for every state. Well, neither one is going to get everything they want. So you see the first major compromise in the Constitutional Convention. It's called the Great Compromise. And what they did was they set up a bicameral legislature, meaning 2 houses, with the upper house being the Senate, and that would have equal representation, 2 senators per state. Whereas the lower house, the House of Representatives, is going to have representation based on population. So based on the number of people you have living in your state, that's how many representatives you can have in Congress. So first debate solved. However, here comes another debate. Who do we count for population? Because a lot of the southern states are like, we have all these slaves. They should count for population. Now, remember, it's about power. It's about having power and having a voice in the Congress. And you want, and let's be honest, you want to have the loudest voice because you're representing your state. You want to be heard. You want to get what you need for your state. So the southern states are coming in saying, we need a louder voice, so we need more representatives. And one way we can get more representatives is if we count all our slaves. Then you have the northern states are like, whoa, wait a minute. If we count all the slaves, then those southern states are going to have way more representatives than us, louder than us. We can't have that. So they come up with another compromise. It's called the 3/5 compromise. And what they agreed to is that they'll take a population count of the slaves, and 3/5 of them, or 60%, will count towards the population of those states. So 2 major compromises right there. the Great Compromise and the Three-Fifths Compromise. I should also throw in at this point that another part of the Three-Fifths Compromise was a agreement that the United States would end its participation in the Atlantic slave trade in 1808. They put a 20-year expiration date on the Atlantic slave trade. Keep in mind that most European countries had already stopped, but we're going to go another 20 years based on this compromise here. Okay, so coming out of the Constitutional Convention, what we have is we have a bicameral legislature based on both equal representation and representation by population. We've also created two new branches in the Constitution. We have the executive branch and the judicial branch. So we have three different branches in our government, and that creates this idea of separation of powers. So each branch does its own thing, and then they have what's called checks and balances, different things that they can do to keep the other branches from getting too far out of control. For example, the president has the power to veto legislative law. And Congress can pass a law and he can veto it and say, nope, we're not going to do it. He can do that. That's his check on Congress. Congress can check the president because if they get 2/3 a vote, they can override the veto. And then what we're going to find later is that the judicial branch will have the power to determine the constitutionality of laws. And they can, and so that's their check as well. So each branch has a check on the other. And the whole idea is we don't want tyranny. We don't want a government that gets too strong. But even with all of that, there is still concern that our government, our central government, had way too much power. And so you're going to have a debate between the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists of how to get the Constitution ratified. You needed 9 of the 13 states to agree to it. The Federalists, represented by Alexander Hamilton, John Jay, and James Madison, are going to start writing a series of essays. And these essays are written on behalf of ratifying the Constitution. They're all going to be put together in a book. It's called the Federalist Papers. What's eventually going to end up happening is the Anti-Federalists are going to push back and they're going to say, hey, listen, what we really want is we want individual rights in the U.S. Constitution. So as a final compromise to get the Constitution ratified, the Federalists, James Madison, agreed to put in individual rights, which will become the first 10 amendments of the Constitution. We refer to it as the Bill of Rights. He will add that to the Constitution once the Constitution is ratified. And that's exactly what he did. The Constitution was ratified by all 13 states. It took about a year and a half, but all 13 states ratified it. And the Bill of Rights was then added. And that's the first 10 amendments of the Constitution, your individual rights. Okay? So that's how we got the U.S. Constitution. And here we go. I just skipped over. I already talked about big idea number 7. I didn't even get to it, but just a reminder that, the Constitution of the United States created a new central government defined by federalism and separation of powers. I didn't talk specifically about federalism. Let me just touch on it. Essentially, federalism is the equal distribution of power between the state governments and the central governments. Remember, under the Articles of Confederation, the states had all the power. Now, the federal government is equally divided. It's almost like two concentric circles, like a Venn diagram. That's how it's supposed to look. And so that was created in the U.S. Constitution. Now, as we go into I'm gonna jump big idea number 8, and I'll come back to it. But I want to jump to big idea number 9. Big idea number 9. The presidencies of George Washington and John Adams are going to set precedents for the way America would behave regarding the relationship between the federal government, state governments, economic policy, and foreign policy. Once the Constitution gets in place, we have an executive branch. We elect our very first president, George Washington. Go George. And George is going to come in and set a bunch of precedents. He is going to be the guy who essentially develops the presidency. One of the first things he's going to do is he is going to establish several executive departments, his cabinet members, but he's going to establish the Department of War, the Department of the Treasury, the Department of State. And those are going to be his guys in the cabinet. So Henry Knox will be the Secretary of War. Alexander Hamilton is the Secretary of Treasury. And of course, Thomas Jefferson will be the Secretary of State. One of the very first things that they have to deal with is the debt and the economics of the United States. Alexander Hamilton is going to be given the task of trying to come up with an economic system that will get us out of debt. And so Hamilton's financial plan is going to become the next big debate in our government. Now, he's going to set certain goals, what he wants to do with his financial plan with the idea of getting us out of debt. Number one, he wants to, combine all the states' debts into a national debt and then reissue that debt. So essentially, like I explained in my class, he wants to refinance the national debt. He wants, what happened during the Articles and during the American Revolution is the debt was divided amongst the states. What he wants to do is bring it all back under the national umbrella, and he will reissue bonds to kind of, get started as a new debt. Now, some of the states, they're like, cool, take on my debt. I'm all right with that. But then there's other states like Virginia and some of the southern states are like, dude, we've already paid our debt off. Why are we having to do this again? But he just says we need to establish credit as a nation, and this is how we're going to do it. And that was his goal, was to establish credit. He also wants to create a national bank. We're going to bring in all this money. We got to have a place to put it. And the bank will also allow us to have, a national currency. It'll allow us to be able to make some income from interest, from loans and stuff like that. That's going to be a point of contention, which I'll come back to in just a second. The last thing he wants to do is he wants to institute taxes. He wants a tariff on all imports, a protective tariff, because he wants to start seeing the build of manufacturing in our country. It's very slow. That's a ways off. But he wants a tariff, and he's also going to put on an excise tax, a tax on whiskey. And that's going to, all of this is going to help pay off our debt. Now, the National Bank, he's going to get a lot of pushback on that, because he's going to have people like Thomas Jefferson and James Madison saying, ain't in the Constitution. They interpreted the Constitution very strictly. They're what we call strict constructionists of the Constitution. They believe if it's not in the Constitution, you can't do it. And Hamilton, who interpreted the Constitution loosely, said it's got to be flexible. You got to, interpret it based on the spirit that it was written. He's going to say the bank is in there because of what's known as the elastic clause, often known as the necessary and proper clause. The very last line of Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution, it basically says, it basically says that just external. Stop it. That's all I'm going to say. Just stop it. I just totally lost my train of thought. Okay, the necessary and proper clause. What that says, the end of Article 1, Section 8, it says that the Congress has the power to do anything necessary and proper to in order to do what's good for the country. Okay? And so what he is saying is the National Bank falls under the necessary and proper clause because Congress has the power to tax, which is an economic thing. They also have the power to regulate interstate commerce, and that gives them the economic authority to create a bank. And so, that's how he went. Madison and Jefferson aren't buying it. They're actually going to have their own little compromise, the Capital Compromise. We're not quite sure what was said behind closed doors, but essentially Jefferson Madison says, we'll back the bank if you back moving the capital of the United States down to the south. And that's how we got Washington, D.C. as our national capital, because of that compromise. This is the other thing that's going to happen during this time is you're going to have pushback against the whiskey tax. The whiskey rebellion is going to come up because we Americans, we've learned all the way back to 1765, if you don't like a tax, just rebel against it. And that's what the farmers of Western Pennsylvania are going to do. They are going to rebel against the whiskey tax. And they're going to get all formed up. And they're going to be like, I'm going to go and fight. We're going to put down this whiskey tax and we'll show them. And George Washington looked at the Constitution and says, I got the power to call up an army. And so he calls up a bunch of state militias and he goes, hey guys, head to Pennsylvania. We got a problem over there. And so I think he has like 4 or 5 different militias. It totaled like 13,000 men, and they're going to go marching into Western Pennsylvania. And the farmers are going to be like, they're out of here. They run away. And the Whiskey Rebellion is a rebellion that was never fought. But what the Whiskey Rebellion tells us is the Constitution works. It works, and it's, I don't know what's going on here. It works, and it's strong enough to support our country in the threat of a rebellion. And so we're good to go. Other things that developed during this time, you're going to start seeing with Washington's foreign policy, you're going to have a war going on over in Europe, and we're not going to want to get involved. He's going to issue the Proclamation of Neutrality. With that, we were saying we're not going to get involved in any wars. We want to be friends with everybody, and we want to trade with everybody. So everything is good, and that's going to be our foreign policy going forward. We're going to sign several key treaties. We're going to sign Jay's Treaty with Great Britain, and they're going to promise to get out of our forts on the western frontier, and we're going to give them most favored nation trading. And so we make them our favorite trading partner, and then they stay in the forts. So there you go. The other thing, the other treaty that we signed is Pinckney's Treaty. We're going to sign that with Spain. There was a little conflict with colonists starting to move south and move west. And there was an area near Florida that Spain said was theirs, and we said it's ours. And I can time them out, just external. The problem is I'm not sure if I'm knocking you out or if I'm knocking them out. Let me see what I can do. And if I knock you out, you just come right back in, okay? So hold tight. I'm going to knock someone out of here real quick. So, participants, not let me do it. I don't know. I tried to knock him out. I don't know if it's going to work or not. Yeah, let me see. I'll put you in timeout. How's that? So I think external, you're in timeout right now, so you won't be able to chat, but you should still be able to listen, okay? So anyway, so Jay's Treaty, Pinckney's Treaty, that's under Washington, okay? Next we have, see, all this is just throwing me off. The other part of the presidents, John Adams. John Adams is going to come in after George Washington leaves. He leaves after 2 terms. He is actually going to give advice to the country going forward. He's going to say no debt, no political parties, no sectionalism, respect the Constitution. And then comes Adams. And Adams has sectionalism, has political parties, has debt, and there's a lot of problems with the Constitution. So let's talk briefly about John Adams. John Adams is going to come in, and France and England are going to be at war, and France is going to keep seizing a lot of our ships. And when that happens, Adams is going to send over some diplomats to France to negotiate a peace, saying, hey, dude, stop messing with our ships. When they get over there, they are approached by 3 French dignitaries who say, we'll let you talk to the big guy, but you got to give us a bribe. We call them XYZ. It's the XYZ affair. And this is when Adams said, oh, dude, millions for defense, but not 1 cent for tribute. We're not playing your game. So when the representatives from the United States came back and word got out that, they tried to bribe us and they said no and Adams said no, everyone came together and said, yo, Adams, good guy, good job and everything. The problem with Adams is he had a little bit of this little complex. He didn't like people talking bad about him. And he's concerned about infiltration of the French and others coming into our country. So he and the Congress are going to pass the Alien and Sedition Acts. And the Alien and Sedition Acts basically said the Alien Acts gave John Adams the power to deport anybody he deemed a threat to American security. And there was really no guidelines or anything like that. But and honestly, at this point, and I just heard this today, so you don't need to know this, but this is just some free information for you tonight. This was actually supposedly created not because he was worried about the French, but he was worried about the Irish and the Scottish because they were coming in and they opposed the Federalists. So he was kind of targeting, or that's what Congress was kind of doing, was targeting the Irish and the Scottish at this point. I just learned that today. It's very interesting. So that's the Alien Act. The Sedition Act made it illegal to say anything negative about the government in print. So the newspapers couldn't write anything bad or they would be prosecuted. We know that's a violation of the First Amendment and the freedom of press. However, Sedition Acts have been passed several times in our history, and the Supreme Court has backed those. So while on the surface, you're like, dude, how can he take away our freedom of speech? And Adams would say, because I can. And that's what he did. And so Adams is seen as completely violating the U.S. Constitution. And so he's going to leave after 4 years in office, and we're going to see a new president come in and a whole new era come in, which that's our next unit. But I do want to go back to big idea number 8. And when I get over here, let me see. Big idea number 8 is the impact we had on the world. The ideals of the American Revolution affected society in America in terms of gender roles, debates about slavery, and while they often inspired revolutions in France and Haiti. What's been going on with women this whole time? We know that women played a huge role during the protest era, the Daughters of Liberty and homespun fabric and stuff like that. When the Declaration of Independence was being drafted, we know that Abigail Adams appealed to her husband when they were writing this, saying, hey, remember the ladies when you're putting this together, come on, guys, it's the women who are driving you, so keep that in force. But coming out of the American Revolution, going into the constitutional era, it was truly believed that we needed to educate our young people in Republican values, small r Republican values, so they would understand how our government worked and how they could be, good members and good citizens and part of our government. So there's going to be this push for education in our country. And that education is going to be educating the young people about our government, about our values, about enlightenment. And it's going to be the women who are expected to do that. And we call this Republican motherhood, that we're looking to the women of our country to actually take the mantle of educating the future of our country. And so it was a very important role at this time. Now, still don't have the right to vote. Still can't run for office, but they absolutely played they're absolutely going to play a vital role. So, okay, good, External. I'm glad to hear that. So there you go. We talked about the debate over slavery. I also want to talk about the inspiration we gave to others. Others saw our revolution, saw the success we had, and they were inspired to have their own revolutions. That's going to lead to the revolution in France. It's also going to lead to the revolution in Haiti. So the world's watching us. The eyes of the world are upon us throughout all of this, and some of them are starting to mimic us and copy us. So there you go. Finally, big idea number 10. I'm getting tired. Wow. Ideas about American national identity found expression in art, literature, and architecture. And while there were national expressions of American identity, there were also strong regional representations as well. We are starting to develop our own identity in the world. No longer are we part of the English colonial system. We're an independent nation. No longer are we English. We are now Americans. And so we're going to start seeing that American culture start to develop. Where we saw a lot of it was in our art. John Trumbull, Peale, Jennings. These are artists who captured the idea of America, the pictures of America and stuff, and our government officials and stuff like that. And so this is going to start growing at this point. And we're really, we haven't gotten there yet, but American art is going to take on its own identity. And it's really going to define who we are as a country. And I can't wait to talk to you guys about the Hudson River School. But you know what? That's in our next unit. And that's the end of this unit right now. So the period ends with the election of 1800, known also as the Revolution of 1800, when John Adams is going to lose to Thomas Jefferson. But that's not on this test. So that's what I have. That's where I'm at. Big ideas done. We'll sit here for, whatever. And we'll sit here, and if you guys have any questions, I'll be happy to answer them at this point. And Ms. Pahovich has been doing it the whole time, so she's been doing an awesome job. So give her props for answering all your questions, because she can type a lot faster than I can. So now it's my pleasure to do these reviews. So a couple more minutes. If there's any specific questions or anything you'd like me to talk a little bit more on, just let me know. Kevin, the XYZ affair, that's going to be about, with the dealing with the French foreign ministers when they tried to bribe the United States in order to have us sit down and talk with us. I didn't mention, but that actually led to the quasi-war, our unofficial, undeclared war with France, a naval war during that time. So that's what that was. Let's see. How do you approach the SAQ in a teacher's perspective? Well, I just look for the right answers. That's my perspective. Now, here's the thing with SAQs. Guys, and I talked to you guys about it in class today, you've got to use evidence. Now, whether you use ACE, which stands for answer the question, cite evidence, and then explain the evidence, or you use T, which stands for topic sentence, evidence, and then analyze the evidence. You've got to have specific evidence. You've got to use terms from history. If I don't see terms, that's what I look for. I look for terms, and then I look if you tell me what the effect those terms have. Both ACE and T, either system you use, that last sentence should be telling me why it's important. What effect did it have? Why would I bother to ask about it? Don't just tell me, don't say one cause of the American Revolution was the Stamp Act. The Stamp Act was a tax on all paper products in the colonies, and then finish it with, that's an example of a cause of the revolution. No, tell me that the Stamp Act is going to lead to protests. Tell me that the Stamp Act is going to lead to the rise of the Sons of Liberty. Tell me that the Stamp Act is going to lead to the beginning of the independence movement and the push back against England. So use your knowledge of history and show it off in SAQs. SAQs are where you show off everything you know. So you've got to know the content in order to do that. Okay? So that's how I would approach the SAQ. Section 16 of the Northwest Ordinance, Jacob, that is the no slavery clause in that. So they said no slavery in the Northwest Ordinance. Okay, anything else, guys? All right, I'm just looking. Okay. All righty. Well, there we go. Oh, wait. Someone sent me a remind. Let me look. Let's see. Okay, this has nothing to do with the exam, but this is a great topic for, I got some dual credit students out there. Somebody asked me, what's the benefit of taking the AP exam if you're in dual credit? What that does for you, dual credit will get you credit in Texas schools, no doubt about it. But what the AP exam will do, it will elevate you above all other dual credit students. You will show colleges that you're willing to take on the challenge of the AP exam. And on top of that, when you pass it, and you will, I have no doubt, the person who's asking me this, I know you will pass the exam. That will also give you the opportunity to take higher level classes in college. It will also give you, in some colleges, might give you elective credit. And then there's also the AP Scholars Program. And this is something that's always overlooked. If you pass, and Ms. Pahovich can write this because I don't remember the exact breakdown. If you pass a certain number of AP exams with a 3 or higher, you get scholarship money. So dual credit's great. It'll get you the credit for the U.S. history, but AP scores will get you more scholarship money. And that's really a big deal. And like she says, the AP exam it's not even just nationwide, Ms. Pahovich, it's international. So you're going up against international students and across the country. And when you pass that, you are telling colleges, I am ready to come to your school. And let's be honest, or I'll be honest, there's some dual credit teachers out there that they don't teach the level that we teach at O'Connor, or that we teach at Clark, or that we teach in Northside. They just say, oh, you're dual credit, you're good to go. So I want you to take the AP exam to show these colleges that you are ready for anything that they can throw at you. And you will benefit way more than just someone who's dual credit. I talked to a recruiter once, and they said if I have a dual credit student and a dual credit student who took an AP exam, they're equal, everything else is equal. The AP exam is going to elevate the AP student above the dual credit student. So there you go. Anyway, there you go. Any other questions? That's a great question, though. I'm glad you asked that. Alrighty, guys. I think we're good. If anything comes up, I think you guys are going to be great on the exam. I think I'm excited to see how well you do tomorrow. I think the first exam, once you got that done, you got a good feeling for what to expect tomorrow. Remember, 25 stimulus-based multiple choice questions, 1 SAQ, all in one sitting. Yes, the AP breakfast tomorrow morning, free food. Don't ever say no to free food. With that, I am going to say goodnight because I'm tired. And my voice, I can feel it. It's starting to go away. So you guys have a great night. Ms. Bahovich, thank you very much for your help. Mr. Rios, I know you're watching from Clark. I appreciate you being here as well. Everybody have a great AP US History night, and we'll see you next time.